Whether you go to a startup biotech, an established company, or a large pharma, you can imagine we all experience that differently as well.
Welcome to the Free the PhD podcast, where we explore the ups and downs of academic life and career transitions. I'm your host and founder of Free the PhD, Fei Cao. Today, we'll be chatting with Dr. Oivin Guicherit. Oivin is Director of Applications at StemOnyx Inc., and as we'll hear, has worked in multiple different roles from a CRO to biotech to pharma. We'll talk about his PhD career transition story, discuss the differences between types of industries, and get some straight talk about what you can do to help find a job you love. Dr. Guicherit received his PhD in biochemistry from Baylor College of Medicine and did his postdoctoral work at Stanford University.
Hi, everybody. My name is Oivin Guicherit. I am the Director of Applications and Head of Services at a startup company called StemOnyx. And StemOnyx essentially is a stem cell company that specializes in stem cell-derived cell-based cultures for drug discovery.
Awesome. So we're going to rewind back in time a little bit and investigate why you were interested in going to graduate school.
Yes, a very good question. I decided late, actually, in my high school career, what I was going to do. I really always enjoyed biology and chemistry, and I was pretty good at that, always had good grades, unlike some of the other classes. And so it became clear to me that a career in science might be something to try. And to be honest with you, I had no real sense of what that might be like many of us, again, of course, in high school. So I went to university to become a scientist. And the way it worked back in the days in Holland is there was no bachelor degree. You had to go all the way to a master's degree. And so I went to the department where my major officially was biochemistry, but really hands-on, I got more training in cell biology and molecular biology in that department. Mm-hmm. And then after I finished my master's, I had to decide, of course, what was going to come next. And, back in the days, as maybe with a lot of young people outside this country, there was a big interest to at least have some opportunity to come experience science and research in America. And if I hadn't said it, I'm Dutch, and so my undergraduate and my master's I did in Holland. And so I was always very interested in coming to America, and I've always been a bit of a guy who likes adventure, and I thought this is a great opportunity to get exposed to science in America and learn about, the culture there as well. And that's how my career in this country started.
Now, for sure, I think grad school offers a lot of opportunities outside of the access to science. Could you give us a brief description or abstract of your research project in grad school?
So in grad school, again, the department was a department of biochemistry. But again, most of my work was based around, I'd say, molecular and cell biology. And so my project was focused on an enzyme. The gene expressing this enzyme was expressed in muscle and non-muscle tissues. And the reason we were interested in a muscle-specific one is not only was that highly expressed, but it was engaged in a certain metabolic cycle that we were very interested in. Really, the point was that this is a very exciting, new, interesting project. And to also touch on real briefly, when you go to grad school and you have to select your lab, there's a lot of things that go into that, right? And very importantly, when I joined this lab, my PI said, so okay, there's two ways to go. You can either work on what's been our bread and butter in this lab, and what that means, you have a lot of legacy information, legacy data, and a lot of people that are still here that you can tap into. But we want to go in this other direction around with some new projects, and you could go there, but it'll be, as he put it at the time, sink or swim. And again, it's maybe the adventurer in me that said, you know what, I want to go try something new and different. And I have made decisions like that throughout my career. It's just kind of who I am. As I got some more traction, it became more and more exciting because everything I found was new and different. And it was really some of the first data that I generated for the lab. So that was very exciting. And so the main focus was around studying the gene regulation and expression, essentially what regulated the expression, I should say, of this enzyme in muscle. And then there was also an interest as a counter to that to finally clone the non-muscle specific gene, because that gene was so lowly expressed in other tissues that nobody had actually been able to clone the gene. And back in the days, it was very important to clone genes because that was the easiest way to learn about their sequence composition, and then use those gene probes to learn about other biology in these tissues that you couldn't easily do without having the probe. And remember, this is back in the days when full genome sequencing and all these kind of things were still way on the horizon, right? So there was no easy way to get to these things, but do it the hard way and clone them out the old-fashioned way and then go from there. And that was the kind of focus of my work.
So while you were doing this work, what might have prompted you to start thinking about, okay, you're doing all this exciting science, what's next? Like, are you going to take this forward into, a postdoc? Was that already in front of your mind? Or what options did you weigh? And then what factors influenced your decision?
And as everybody out there that's in grad school struggles with is what next, right? Now, and what next in different ways. A, do I want to continue with this work, or do I want to go do something different? And two, of course, very importantly, where do I want to go do this? Now, keep in mind, as a immigrant, as I was and am, there were fewer options in terms of funding, right? So the other part that people have to consider that are immigrants like myself, as a non-American citizen, I didn't really have access to many fellowships. So on top of that, I had to also weigh the fact that this lab that accepts me needs to pay for my postdoc out of their funding. Right? And so not many labs are able or willing to do that. So that also restricts your options. Mm-hmm. Now, but to get back to the first question, I am a big believer that while you go to training, being undergraduate, graduate, and postdoc, I am a big believer of learn as many different things as you can and broaden your experience as much as you can so that you are better prepared for more options for the next step in your career, which in my case was industry. Of course, for other people, they stay in academia. But especially when you go to industry, and that's even more so the case now than when I started in industry, really when you bring in a certain breadth of experience, I think it can be an advantage. Now, having said that, I'm not necessarily advocating that you need to do something completely different. So in my case, I went from grad school where I was studying a muscle-specific enzyme and its gene expression. I went to do a postdoc in a molecular pharmacology department with a PI that was an expert in muscle biology. Mm-hmm. Now, I did something different, but just to kind of give you the idea that what happens in many cases is even if you go in a slightly different direction, there is something still that ties together. I think it's more uncommon, if you will, for people to go in a completely different direction. So that's how I kind of decided. I really liked muscle biology at that point. Yeah. This is what I learned in grad school, and I wanted to stay in that space. And then the question was, what labs out there specialize in this? What are they doing for projects? And like I said, in my case, will they be able to fund my postdoc?
Right. So presumably then you did find a lab that was interesting, valued the same direction of research, and could fund you, right? So then in that lab, when you were working on your projects, then given the fact that you're kind of at a stage where you could consider moving on into a faculty path versus something else, what did that crossroads in your career direction look like?
Right, let me preface this with saying that when I was a postdoc, as I like to joke with people back in the Middle Ages, as I'm dating myself now, of course, biotech was kind of a new thing. And to be totally honest with you, I was very unfamiliar, if I can put it that way. I had not a good idea what biotech was about. I did not have many contacts in biotech. And so, why even consider that career? Now, for me, there was a couple of things going. So as I was doing my postdoc, I think it became very clear to me as I had gone through the training of undergraduate, master's, grad school, postdoc, that I'm really not what I call faculty material. And there's several ways that I can explain that. But pretty clear to me, I was not the kind of person who loved grant writing. Mm-hmm. I was the kind of person who wanted to work on something that I thought had more of a direct application and was more real life, if you will, stuff. And back in the days, many academic labs were working on phenomenal underlying and interesting biology, but it wasn't necessarily directly translatable into an application. And I was really that kind of person that wanted that. Now, I just told you I knew very little about biotech and the industry, so why even consider that? And I think this, again, taps into your personality of who you are and what you're open to. I've always been the kind of person that wants to experience new things. I've always had a sense of adventure. And so when the opportunity presented itself, and I was really lucky that this happened because I didn't really go search for positions in industry. It was really to a fellow postdoc in the lab who told me that he had a friend in industry who was looking to fill a position. Are you open to exploring that? And I said, absolutely. And so that essentially is what started my career in the industry, where I already knew I wanted to go in that direction, but didn't necessarily know where to start or how to get there. So I was a little lucky with that connection.
Sure. And a lot of people will say that they're lucky. I mean, I felt very lucky with my transition, but I think there's always a foundation of either skill sets or a network that helped you be lucky, right? So in I guess in your case, your network just happened to be in the lab. Obviously, then they must have found your past research experience very valuable for that role. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been interested.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So for this for your first step then out of academia into this completely new direction, what kind of thoughts or assumptions did you have about what working would be like? And having gone through that whole process and now through multiple different types of roles, then what kind of misconceptions are flat out wrong about what people might think when they're in academia versus what real life working in a company or an organization is like?
That's very important, actually, because I had no idea what I was getting into. And if I can give the young folks out there that are thinking about all this, one piece of advice is networking, networking, networking. And I was just lucky that, like I said, my mini network in the lab helped me without having to make maybe the extra effort. Although, again, I work through my mini network, but there's so much more possible now for kids nowadays to network with the industry. So we can get back to that. But in terms of, moving the transition, so it was a little difficult at first because you have to understand, as you well know, you're in postdoc mode. That means you're used to doing everything by yourself, for your own career. And you get to this point where you believe that unless you do it, and you yourself have had a hand in it, it can't be right, or you're questioning it. And so now a big difference, I think, between being in academia and industry is that in academia, you tend to be much more isolated and on your own, right? It's not that labs don't collaborate and people collaborate at different levels, but it is really much more isolated in that way. While industry, if you think about it, is a company cannot be successful if those that work in a company work separate from each other. They need to work together. So what you quickly realize is, as much as in academia up to that point, you were expected to do your own project and run your own show with some help from others. In industry, you're quickly expected to start working with other people and be part of teams and larger projects. And so that was a bit of a transition, right? Because now it comes down to you have a part to play, others have a part to play, and we have to learn to play nice and play together. Now, what worked in my favor is I just happen to have the personality where I actually love working with people. I'm very much a people's person, and that's not necessarily the same for everybody. And so for me, I actually enjoy that even more now. But you can imagine for a lot of people who are used to working on their own and doing everything themselves to now be suddenly dumped into an environment where they are encouraged and expected to work together, that was a bit of a transition. The other thing you have to also understand, of course, depending on the industry, right? Whether you go to a startup biotech, an established company, or a large pharma, you can imagine we all experience that differently as well.
Yes. Absolutely. You've actually been in multiple roles. You've mentioned right now you're at a startup, and you've certainly also had experiences in some of these sort of behemoth level organizations.
Yes.
So can you comment a little bit on how it might have been different to work in, say, one of these large, maybe perhaps matrixed organizations, or ones that are very hierarchical and just traditional, versus small, scrappy startup, and how your research and training has come into play?
I think that everybody in this business, in the biopharma business, needs to experience both sides, if you will. In my case, I have not only been in biotech and in pharma, I've also been on the CRO side. And for those that don't know what that means, that stands for Contract Research Organization. That essentially is more of a service provider, right? And a service provider, whether it's reagents or assays or culture, essentially your job as a company is to support the biotech and pharma companies that have therapeutic programs with what you provide. And it's, of course, you can imagine a slightly different, or in some cases, a quite different role, and it's not for everybody, right? And now I have had good fortune that I've experienced all three sides of the industry, if you will. And there's some things I like in some, and some things I like in others. But I definitely recommend anybody in this business to experience both biotech and pharma. Now, in terms of experiences as you first come in, if you think of a biotech, and especially a startup biotech, the way I explained, I'll joke with people about it, it's almost kind of think of it as a lab with a lot more funding and a much more of a focus, right? Because you come in and it's still a startup, so that means there is clearly a lot of funding because it's a startup that brings in venture capital money and all that, focused around a particular problem, right? And the nice thing is everybody in the group is focused on that problem, and we all have a part to play. And the transition is easier in some ways because there's still a lot of exploratory type stuff going on, if you will, more so than a pharma, a behemoth, as you call it, which is really set up with a lot more parts and pieces, a lot more layers. It's more complex. But really what pharma is good at is drug development, right? So what pharma is good at is taking an asset, putting it to clinical trials, and bringing it to the market. What pharma is much less, I think, efficient at, if I can put it that way, is the early exploratory stuff. And that's why I think eventually we had this huge biotech community develop. So what happens now is, as I've looked back over the 20 years I've been in the industry, you see now more of a separation where a lot of the early stuff, if you will, in the drug discovery and development process is happening in biotech, and then they manage to bring it to a certain stage, and especially when it gets ready for big time into the clinic and become eventually a drug, that now is typically tackled by pharma. So biotech plays a much bigger role at the front end, and pharma plays a much bigger role in the back end. And that then also gets me to, depending on who you are, if you're a drug discovery, exploratory biology guy or girl like myself, then you probably will find you fit better with, biotech. If you're the kind of person who wants to get more involved in what we call nowadays translational medicine, so the back end of the process as you get ready for going to the clinic, or even you're more interested in a regulatory or clinical role, clearly you find that more in pharma. There is some larger biotech companies that do that as well, but you more typically will find those functions in pharma. Because biotech is so focused and also has limited funds, they typically don't do all the different pieces that one finds in pharma. So where I tell folks and recommend they also experience pharma for a while is I explain it to that, almost think of it as schooling in the whole process of drug discovery and development, because you get to see all the pieces. So even though that might not be the part you're contributing to or you're involved with, because you will be exposed to that through presentations and large project meetings, you get to learn more about the whole process than you can in a biotech setting. So all these things come into play as to where do you want to start? Where do you want to go, and where do you want to eventually settle in this industry?
That's fantastic. I love your summary and the way that you were comparing these different kinds of work environments, and then also the different kinds of focuses that each of these three pieces, what they play in this whole process. So in your current role, what is the major problem or problems that you solve for your organization, and what services are you providing for what audiences or customers?
For all of us who have been in this industry, and for those of us who especially have been doing it for a while, and this is where I touched on a certain breadth of experience to bring in, but the other piece of that is be very adaptable and flexible. It is highly unlikely, if not for sure going to happen, is that what you start with in the industry is not what you're going to end up in the industry. And to give you an example, I came into the industry for the first time with hands-on experience working with cell-based platforms and doing a lot like I call early exploratory biology, and therefore what we in the industry would probably call assay development for setting up these platforms that eventually go into the drug discovery process. So obviously it was not a surprise that I end up in that part of the industry first, because that built off my academic experience and my training as a postdoc. But eventually now I'm in a role that is quite different, and I can explain that to you. But so I started out in an assay development role, eventually moved more into a screening role, as we call it, drug discovery and screening. And what that meant is these cell-based assays that I helped develop with my team source, that moved into the screening setting for now higher throughput screening of 100,000 to 1 million compounds. I eventually transitioned into that role. And then over time, actually moved also into roles where I had more of a commercial function, if you will. And what that meant is that I dealt with a lot more external projects, and I dealt with customers and clients. That then sets me up for what am I doing now. Mm-hmm. Because of all that experience, I was approached by this company that I work for now and said, look, we're setting up this new platform. It's cell-based platform. We're trying to make these cultures for drug discovery. Now, from what I told you already, you can say, oh, that looks like the experience that I had. They said, we want to now go big time and build out, we can sell these as products, but we also want to build out the surface side of the industry. And when I see surface side in the industry, in this particular case, it meant rather than us selling these cell-based cultures to the biopharma industry for assay development and screening on their end, we want to be able to offer them that we can do it for them as well. And nowadays, that makes actually a lot of sense, because we live in what I call an outsourcing world. Mm-hmm. A lot of the industry is start to realize they can't do everything, right? So why not work together? That means company A is good at this, company B is good at something else. Why go build the infrastructure for company B when you can simply work with company B? And so the industry, thankfully, is moving more and more direction. That means every company gets more efficient at what they're doing because they're more focused, and they then work with others. So what happens is, as we set up this company and move forward, we realize more and more that people would rather send us their compounds and their compound collections for us to do the screening and assay development on our end, rather than buy these cultures and these screening plates from us. And so as that realization kicked in, management of this company said, look, we don't have this in-house yet. We need to bring in somebody like, myself to come help set us up, because it builds off the experience I had built over the almost 20 years at that point of doing assay development and screening. They said, if somebody can help us set it up and build it, if somebody obviously comes to the experience. Now, the new piece there for me is the customer facing and the commercial side of things, right? Again, that is highly dependent on your personality and what you're looking for. Not for everybody, right? Sales, business development, commercial, marketing, all these things, not for everybody. Again, my personality is such that I love working with people. Because of that, I've always managed external activities as well. And if anything, I am really enjoying this setting up relation, maintaining relations, and continuing working with somebody on, whatever the project might be. And because of that, I think it was more obvious for me to be able to take that transition as well, if that's where I wanted to go. And that's eventually where I end up now. And now I'm in a position where I have a hybrid role, which works great for me, where I have the surface group, or the screening group, as we call it, report to me. So I still oversee a lot of the, let's call it, science and research that goes to that. But at the same time, I'm the outward-facing part of this particular subgroup in the organization. So I talk to customers, I talk to clients, I help translate back into our company what it is the client wants, what they're trying to achieve with the project, and then we now on the inside put together a proposal with costing, timelines, deliverables, and then my team executes on those projects. So I have kind of a dual role right now, but again, this is where there's many options in this industry, and depending on your background, your experience, and your desires, you then will find your niche.
That's really exciting, and it sounds like truly a perfect marriage of all of the different kinds of experiences that you've had. So as you were moving through these different types of career opportunities, could you share how they came about? So were you actively looking for some of them? Did people end up just telling you about new opportunities through networking that happened on the job? How did these manifest?
There's so much opportunity now for young folks coming out of academia, postdocs, to interact with industry. If they don't make use of that, they're really not doing themselves a favor. They're missing the boat. Networking. It is so important because I can tell you, I have over my 20 years worked for 6 different companies, and every single one I've gotten through my network. And what I mean by that is just different things. In some cases, my network gave me already a contact in the company that is trying to hire me because they knew of me already, or they learned about me, and they have somebody inside who knows me, who can speak on my behalf and who can vouch for me. It makes a huge difference, right? Because if I have to hire somebody and I have a close friend, acquaintance, somebody I respect, and that person speaks highly of this person, why would I go hire somebody out of the blue that I have no idea what I'm getting into? It's not to say that you cannot hire people without having a direct contact to them. That could be great people to have, but it really helps a lot, right? So I think networking is so important. Now, it could also simply be, which also happened with me, where I didn't necessarily know somebody in an organization, but the job came to me because of my network through other people in other parts of the organization or in other companies that happen to hear about a job. So again, my networking has helped me either get to the job or get me in the door, and in some cases directly hired me into the company because they knew me and they knew I had the background and experience to help them achieve what they were looking for. And so networking, I cannot stress it enough, is a very, very important tool nowadays. And there is so much opportunity to do that. I would highly encourage anybody in this position to look out for any kind of networking and start working on it.
Since that is one of the biggest pieces of advice that you would give to PhDs looking for jobs, sometimes people are at a loss of how to actually do that. So given that I know you actually host some networking events locally yourself, and that you've been doing networking your whole career, can you give some actionable suggestions for people?
It's a lot easier in places where there's a concentration of biopharma. Okay. And as you well know, and many people maybe out there might know already, there is some major, what we call biotech, biopharma hubs, right? Places like Boston, San Francisco, San Diego, where I am myself. It's a lot easier because there's a huge concentration. Now, in other cases, there isn't. Now, that's still not to say that you cannot reach out to people, because often we might still have friends, contacts that are in other places. There's a couple of ways to go, right? So if you don't even know where to start, often it might be that your academic institution already has some access to the biotech, biopharma industry, and they can maybe help you with that. Like I said, again, in these hubs where it's more concentration, there's other ways to go, and we can get back to that, right? So that's one way to go. Nowadays with LinkedIn, it's a very easy tool to connect with people, right? So let's say for some reason you have an interest in a company because of some job description, you don't know anybody, simply go on LinkedIn, look who works at that company, try to make some contacts with some people. You'd be surprised how many people are actually willing to work with young people and willing to help them start their career, right? So make use of that, right? Now, of course, you could always reach out to recruiters, this kind of thing, but that's really more for people who are more maybe established in the industry. But if you happen to know a recruiter who works with the biopharma industry, absolutely. But, you know, you can use LinkedIn as a tool. You might be able to go to your academic, connections. You might happen to have friends. I mean, in my case, I was lucky when I started my career. I happened to have friends who were connected to people in biotech and to get some help there. Now, once you're in these hub places, there's a whole lot of other set of tools that become available, because you will find there is constant networking going on already. And a lot of these things, as you pointed out, are actually to bring these folks together. So I know that in my case, I have two of my colleagues and friends now that we together realized that this is actually helpful to people. And so what we did, we started a networking on our own that was specifically meant to bring biotech and graduate students in contact with industry professionals. And on top of that, what we do, we don't just simply get together to drink and eat. Of course, it's a lot of fun. But we also then ask a particular industry professional to come in and do a bit of a 15, 20-minute, I wouldn't call it presentation, but more a bit of a chat, a bit of a lecture about, look, this is how I started my career, this is how I did it, but here's some options, so that they actually get clearly educated while having some fun about what the options are. And that, of course, is much more possible in these hubs where academic and industry are concentrated. But even people that are outside these hubs, I think, can find other ways to connect. So these are some of the things, I would recommend. And again, people like yourself, there's many people out there who either run their own organizations, who are involved with organizations that are specifically set up to guide people early in their career, let's say, to make some of these, transitions and make some of these choices. So there's a lot out there. People just need to be willing to go out there, explore it a little bit.
Yeah. We feel like we're not allowed to do that, or it's a waste of our time, but really it's, like you were saying, just so valuable to meet new people with different perspectives and connections. So what final advice would you like to leave listeners with in terms of just thinking about themselves, their own value, and perhaps what impact they could potentially make in the world?
Don't be afraid. Take some chances. It's still early in your career. Yes, you might make some missteps, but you have your whole career still in front of you. There's a reason many of us go to multiple companies, right? I've done this now 20 years. I'm already on company number 6. It has a couple of different reasons. In some cases, I was recruited away. In other cases, I was looking for a new challenge. So there's many things you can do out there and many ways you can contribute. There's going to be a lot of challenges along the way, but I can guarantee you're going to get so much also more back for it that it outweighs the challenges and the things that scare you. But you got to be willing to go out there and get it and do it. There's so much more possible than many of us know than when we're early in our career. So not be afraid to take a chance. Go out there. You'll be pleasantly surprised how interested people are in you and how much more you can contribute than you maybe even think you're worth at that point. And so start with the networking, take some chances, and go explore the world. There's a lot out there and a lot of fun stuff to do.
That wraps up my conversation with Dr. Oivin Guicherit about his PhD transition from academia into different parts of industry. I'm your host, Vei Cao, founder of Free the PhD. If you liked this episode of the Free the PhD podcast, share with your favorite PhD and tell us what you'd like to hear next. Join the Free the PhD career community for job selection guidance, resume edits, interview coaching, and supportive practical advice for PhDs looking for a new career for less than your Netflix account. Connect with Free the PhD on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Thanks for listening.